So hi everyone, welcome to the Do London Differently podcast. So I'm Rochelle, the Programme Manager at London National Park City, and I'm really excited today to have with us Dr. Bushra Schuitemaker, who is a zoologist, a microbiologist, science and nature writer, radio presenter, also a volunteer at Black Girls Hike UK, former vice chair of the British Ecology,
the Reed Network,
the Reed Network, yes, so the Racial and Ethnic Equality and Diversity Network, and British Palestinian, but most recently, PhD graduate.
London has been given the first ever national park city status.
London, the world's first national park city.
Come and enjoy, because life's too short, really and truly.
And London, wow, what an amazing city.
So, greener,
Healthier.
And wilder.
You did your PhD in poultry health and welfare, which is amazing. So big congrats for kind of getting through that.
Thank you.
And I just wanted to give you some space to kind of share a bit about your PhD and maybe some fun chicken facts that you maybe want to share with us today.
Absolutely. I have so many fun chicken facts. My favourite chicken fact I love to always tell people is that for every human on Earth, there are 4 chickens.
Wow.
Which is crazy to think about. Like, that's just how many chickens there are. So there are more chickens than any other bird on the planet, any other animal on the planet. They actually comprise about 75% of all land-reared animals on Earth are chickens. So as a zoologist, why would I not want to help the most dominant animal on the planet? But for me personally as well, my first ever pet was a chicken. Really? I always wanted a dog or a cat, and my mom simply said no. But for some reason, I was allowed a pet chicken. Her name was Princess Zara Fidget, very appropriate. And I used to draw pictures of her, have them all over my walls. So my passion for chickens did actually start from childhood. I used to have an incubator. I would hatch eggs in the kitchen, much to my mother's disgust and annoyance. But obviously it ultimately led to my passion for zoology and my passion to help animals and kind of that wider science as well. But my research itself, it was on poultry and understanding their welfare and some sustainable agricultural practices. But I was ultimately trying to find better ways to monitor their health and welfare, but just using their fecal samples. That's because there's plenty of it, and you're also not stressing the animal out in order to collect it. Right. So it's a really high welfare way in order for us to get a good idea of what I consider to be one of the most important animals on Earth, and a better way for us to be able to help them.
That's brilliant. Yeah, and that explains a lot about the rest of your trajectory, I think. But I just also wanted to go back and give some context about how we met. So we actually met at a Pint of Science event, which is, I think it's a global series of talks and events that make science quite accessible to the public. So they're hosted in pubs in the UK and abroad. Yeah, I think that was run by another ranger called Emily Boxall, who's from the she's from the Ecological Citizens Network. And this particular talk was at the Glitch in Waterloo. And you were a part of a brilliant trio of talks. Your talk was amazing. So it was about walking as a tool for activism. It was around challenging the ideas around the UK countryside and land ownership, and looking at some of the colonial legacy and the history of land rights, as well as kind of, reclaiming access to some of that countryside. But yeah, looking forward to kind of getting into all of that with you, and hopefully a bit more today. But before we do, I just wanted to give you some space to share anything else that kind of you felt was important to share about, the stuff that you've done, because there's so much to you, and the talk that you gave as well at the Glitch.
Yeah, I was so honoured to be able to give that talk, and I'm really grateful to have this opportunity now to kind of dive into it a little bit more, into it deeper, and actually how applicable some of my experiences are to maybe some of the listeners and other audiences. For me, I say that I grew up with something called countryside privilege. So I grew up in rural Essex, rural countryside. I came from a really small high school. There was only 800 people for my entire high school, only about 18 people in our entire sixth form. So it was a really small rural school from a very rural area, where I was also the only person of colour, which I think helped me to create some resilience in working in industries that are typically quite maybe underrepresented in terms of ethnic minorities and historically excluded groups, especially. And so I think my upbringing in that rural area is really what helped me to engage with nature and is why I fell in love with nature. Growing up around farmers, having access to an incubator in order to hatch my chickens, those kind of experiences, I didn't appreciate how unique they were and how special they were until I actually went to university and started engaging with different groups that have not come from these super rural areas. And I think especially growing up in the countryside, you learn about the rules, you learn about countryside code, you know how to behave, what to expect, where to go, how to navigate around different areas, how to navigate the land. And I think that is a potential barrier for some people who are only just starting to experience or visit the countryside for the first time. And yeah, like I say, it wasn't until I got older that I really appreciated that privilege I had from growing up in the countryside and what that has led me to do later on down the line. So I'm always just really keen to help break those barriers, get more people into the countryside, connecting with nature and having some of those experiences I was afforded in childhood.
I love that. That's awesome. Because I mean, I wonder, one of my questions was, what do you have a specific moment or memory that kind of led you down the path of actually then going and doing a full degree in zoology? Obviously, there's so many moments and memories of, growing up in rural Essex and your incubator and having chickens. But yeah, was the step to actually commit and study something like zoology, was that modeled to you? Did you see that around you, or kind of how did you, make that decision there?
My love for animals, nobody actually knows where that has come from. My family are not big animal people. We didn't really grow up with pets. Animals were very much something that were farmed and is eaten, but not even necessarily by us. So there was a very interesting relationship there in terms of modeling with animals and with nature. But for me, I was just obsessed with David Attenborough, The Really Wild Show, all of those kind of animal TV shows that were there for children. And I would be watching them. I remember one time when I was younger, going over to someone's house after school, and I'd seen all week being advertised the new Blue Planet and that they were going to be showing the first ever footage of blue whales. And I literally went over there with my TV guide, like, yes, I can come over for dinner, but I have to watch this on TV at 6 p.m. That's how engaged I was with it, even from a young age. I considered maybe I wanted to go into veterinary medicine. I knew I wanted to work with animals and I knew I loved science and research. But for me, it's so much more than just the animals themselves. As much as I love learning about and observing animals, I also really love to understand that wider ecosystem. So how they interact with the planet, how is their relationship with humans, what effect does conservation have on the animal, but also on that wider area as well. So that's why I've really loved zoology, is kind of thinking of that bigger picture, that wider impact, not necessarily just what is cute and fluffy,
Definitely, yeah. Taking like a holistic and intersectional, like critical approach to everything that you're kind of focused in on and studying. Yeah, I love that. I think you've also worked across the agriculture and ecology sectors. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experiences in both of those spaces and what that involves exactly as well. Yeah.
So the agricultural industry in the UK is the least diverse industry. It's 97% white and it is overly dominated by men as well. And this is partly historical, especially thinking of land access, usage and who we see in the countryside. Only about 3% of Black British people actually live rurally in the UK and across England. And so I think that in itself helps to elucidate some of the observations people might make about the agricultural industry. But my personal experience has been fantastic. I have thoroughly enjoyed working across the agricultural industry, going to farms and working with farmers. See, I particularly worked with poultry farmers. I would actually go to the poultry farmers, visit commercial farms in order to collect my samples and do my research. With poultry farmers, they have very, very slim margins. So they are really engaged with innovation. Anything you can offer them that is going to improve welfare, improve sustainability, make things more affordable for them, they are all ears and they're ready to get their hands dirty with it. And that wasn't something I was necessarily expecting. I think sometimes there's a stereotype around farmers that they're very set in their ways and things can be a bit old-fashioned. And I had the complete opposite experience. Anytime I was meeting with a farmer, farmer, they would always ask me around, how do I pronounce my name? Is everything accessible on the farm for me? Had some interesting situations where I'd attend farms where previously they'd only ever had male workers and male visitors. So they didn't even have female staffing toilets, which was just something that, you know, they'd never experienced it before. But now they've got things in place in order to kind of facilitate that better. So I've thoroughly enjoyed working in that space. And I think there's so much opportunity for innovation. And I think the way that our country is changing, both with the climate, but also with our populations, we really need to diversify what we're able to offer in the agricultural industry. I find fava beans really interesting. So fava beans is something that as a Palestinian, I love. We have them for breakfast with something called foul, one of my favorite all-time dishes. We actually grow tons of fava beans in the UK.
What do they look like?
So they look a bit like flat broad beans, but maybe like a bit of a darker brown kind of colour.
Nice.
But they're really widely used throughout the Middle East and other places in Asia and Africa as well. We don't actually sell them in the UK. We literally grow them, send them over to the Middle East to be put into tins, which I can then buy down the road in London.
Wow.
Which is so backwards to me. If people are already buying them here and we're already growing it here, why is there not a market for it?
Right.
So there's been some interesting things that I've discovered along my way. And I think there is an opportunity to really diversify the agricultural industry because we need the knowledge of a diverse population in order to grow the foods that is going to suit our changing population. And myself, my father is Palestinian. And when I think about my friends who also have immigrant backgrounds, their connection to agriculture, and I mean actually working the land, owning farmland, is only ever at most one generation away.
Right.
So there is this like connection there with so many of like the more ethnically diverse groups of the UK that could really be helping to have a positive influence on our agricultural industry at the moment with their knowledge, with what we can grow, with different agricultural practices. And I think there's a real opportunity there. We just need to bridge some of the gaps and take away some of the barriers that they might be currently facing.
Definitely. Yeah. I've heard so much more about, I guess, adaptive planting and food growing and kind of experiments with, you know, heat resilient plants and, you know, so I think there's so much to learn from diaspora food growing groups in the UK.
Definitely.
And it's exciting to see more of that kind of already kind of happening. And I visited Roots and Shoots yesterday.
Oh, nice.
And they've done an amazing job with their garden, just kind of planting so many different types of plants. And I think they've had years to kind of experiment and see what works well, what stays, when to grow, how to grow it. And it's definitely going in that direction.
So for me, actually, the agricultural industry in the UK, I think is something that we should be the most proud of when it comes to actually what it is to be British and British history. The fact that our climate is really quite temperate. We don't get too crazier summers. We don't get too crazier winters. We can grow food pretty much all year round. And some of the food we can grow without fertilizer as well. This is one of the reasons that the UK was invaded so many times historically, is because of the fact that we have this incredible soil and incredible climate for agriculture. And I think so much has actually been forgotten. But for me, I think it's such an important foundation of British culture.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's good to, I guess, be reminded of because, I think that kind of, it doesn't really take me to my next point, actually. But I was going to ask about, it kind of skips across to your time at the British Ecological Society's Racial and Ethnic Equality and Diversity Network. So let's just call it the READ Network. But I just wondered how your time was there and what did that coincide with in terms of where you were in your career, your studies? And what did you get out of the network and what were like your key insights and takeaways?
So the READ Network, the Racial and Ethnic Equality Diversity Ecological Network. So it was a special interest group that was set up by the British Ecological Society. And they have other special interest groups as well. They have one for neurodivergent ecologists. They also have one for LGBTQ plus ecologists as well. So really allowing those historically excluded groups to have a voice in a sector that isn't the most diverse. what was really powerful about the Read Network particularly is actually I was involved in the creation of it. And it was back in 2019. I was working with Cancer Research UK and the Wellcome Trust. I was actually working on human diseases and drug discoveries for cancer research.
Wow.
But as a background in zoology, with my passion for animals, my brain was always going back to, I want to go back into zoology. I want to go back into researching animals. But then I also was very aware of the fact that I was the only Black British person on my course at university. And then I started thinking about representation on TV, watching things like The Really Wild Show and all those animal documentaries that have influenced my passion and my love for zoology. And realized I didn't know a single Black zoologist. Never had I met one, never had I seen one, read about one, anything. So I started Googling it. I first came across someone called Roger Arlena. She was actually the first female Black zoologist over in America and possibly throughout the whole world.
Amazing.
She had a really traumatic and awful story that was so representative of, I think, many Black women in academia, the way that she was stepped on, the way that her work was then taken away from her and presented under somebody else's name. And she ended up passing away with her doctorate, but not in a great place in terms of her mental health or her economic stability. But I always like to think and remind myself of her as well, because with all science, we're always standing on the shoulders of giants. And for me, as the first Black zoologist, female that I've ever read about, she always really sticks into my mind. But as I was Googling Black zoologists, I was like, what about UK or British? Are there any others? I can't be the only Black zoologist in the whole of the UK. And up popped an article from the British Ecological Society that had literally been written 2 days ago. It said, published 2 days ago. And I was like, oh, crazy coincidence. And it was of someone called Reuben. And he had attended Nottingham University to do zoology. And just like me, was the only Black person on his course. And when he spoke to his personal tutor, he was actually the only Black British zoologist they had ever taught at Nottingham on that course.
Wow.
Which was shocking. And so he'd had the same reaction as me of, well, I can't be the only one. So I wrote this article with the British Ecological Society, and I immediately reached out to him and said, you're not the only one. And there's definitely, if I found you and you found me, there's going to be more of us out there. So slowly, we started building up this network. We said we were almost like connecting icebergs. That's what it felt like. We were all on our own in this place, not really fitting in, having these experiences that we didn't realize were shared until we all got into a room together. And I think that first meeting that we had, and it was a Zoom meeting, but seeing all these other zoologists and ecologists that were Black and brown faces on my screen, I had never felt more empowered. That inspired me to go to an event that was put on by Lido, one of the schools in London, that was specifically encouraging people who are coming from Black backgrounds to go into further education, such as PhDs.
Oh, brilliant.
So that led on to that. And it was actually attending that event, being in a room with other Black British people who are similarly interested in pursuing a PhD, was the thing that really inspired me and made me realize, oh, I'm not the only one. And it also made me realize the importance of having that feeling. That was the first time I'd ever been in a room with people who looked like me and also shared my professional passion as well. The first time in my life. And I didn't realize what I was missing by not having had that before.
Totally, yeah.
And so with the Read Network, that's exactly what we wanted to facilitate. We wanted to empower other people who might have felt like they are the only one on their course or volunteering or in these kind of traditionally white spaces, and give them the support for them to continue on that path. What's one of the biggest achievements I feel is after I started my PhD, since then there's been around 7 of us from the Read Network who all come from ethnic minority backgrounds, who have all done PhDs in zoology, ecology, and very similar subjects as well. And it was very much a domino effect of, once I'd started the process, I started encouraging Reuben to do it, and then he
Brilliant.
went for it. He then encouraged the next person. And before we know it, there's going to be multiple doctorates, which is incredible. All of us coming from this similar background and having this similar passion. And I genuinely don't know, if it wasn't for the British Ecological Society giving us that space, whether or not we had gone down a similar path and continued and been persistent with the thing that we are the most passionate about.
Amazing. Yeah, I think sometimes it's being given the space and the trust. And yeah, and also you guys will be modeling for the next generation, which is so, so powerful. So when you created that network, you were still studying.
So I was actually working. I'd recently finished my undergraduate. So I finished my undergraduate in zoology from Anglia Ruskin University in 2015. And I was actually diagnosed with dyslexia and dyspraxia in my final year of university. And because of that, I don't think that I didn't feel like I'd achieved enough in order to pursue any type of further education. I'd basically convinced myself that I was just not smart enough to proceed. I just didn't have what it takes to do exams and to write essays and the rest of it. So decided to go and work. And this is when I started working in drug discovery for Cancer Research UK and the Wellcome Trust, and realized that it was my passion, my curiosity, my enthusiasm for the research, and also my resilience to do that type of research were far more valuable skills than my ability to recall information and to write a word perfect essay. Getting over that and realizing I'm actually not stupid, I'm actually quite smart, I just need to take a different approach to things, a way that's actually going to work with the way my brain works, which is not necessarily a neurotypical way. And having that time to adjust is what then inspired me to go and proceed and get my PhD.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think it's like quite a fateful timing of kind of creating that network, especially when you're young. I think you're quite unconsciously resilient. It's everything is just what you know, so you kind of can handle it and go along with it. But I think to find that support network at such a crucial time, it's, yeah, like you said, it's had some amazing like impact on you and your friends, and kind of, I'm sure many more people to come. So
yeah, we've also been able to, as part of the Read Network, some of the initiatives we were involved in is we actually created some workshops. So we made sure that we kept the Read Network as a specifically safe space. People had to be coming from a ethnic minority group in order to join. But we'd have a lot of requests from predominantly white organizations who wanted to better understand some of the barriers we were facing. So we actually created a few workshops that were for academics and for industry that really spoke about what it is to truly be an ally to someone who is coming from these backgrounds within that ecological setting, understanding some of those barriers as well, and just understanding our individual points of power and points of privilege as well. So this also led to us working with the likes of Vincent Wildlife Trust and helping do some consultation with them, where we were helping them to develop their recruitment process to make it more accessible. And sometimes it was things as simple as removing the requirement for volunteer experience. Yeah. Because we realize that this is a huge barrier for a lot of people who are coming from ethnically diverse backgrounds, either not having the opportunity to, or having different priorities that wouldn't allow them to do 6 to 10 weeks unpaid experience at a time, where they might also have to pay for their travel and their accommodation. That's just not accessible for a large proportion of the UK.
Yes. Yeah.
Similarly, another requirement for a lot of ecological jobs is to have a driving license. If you are required to drive for a job and you are a qualified person otherwise, I personally think it should be down to that company to support you, either giving you a driver, giving you access to a car, or supporting you to go and do your driving license yourself. Again, it's such an unnecessary barrier that just had become the norm as part of recruitment processes in ecology. Like, you had to have voluntary experience, you had to have a driving license. Actually, those aren't necessary things for a lot of the positions. There are other ways around it, but it would stop people from even applying to the jobs because they were like, well, I don't meet the minimum criterias. Those were such unnecessary minimum criterias. But having a group like the Read Network that could really share our experiences and explain why that's a barrier, why you might not be getting as many applicants from different backgrounds because of these things that are currently part of your application process. So it was really nice actually to work with organizations to try and make some of those changes across the UK. So it was very much about empowering the individuals and individual ecologists, giving them a platform and a safe space, but also turning it into real action as well. I think especially around 2020 and 2021, there were so many of these talks and commitments and statements, but what were the actions?
Right.
And that's the bit that always people seem to struggle with. Like, we can talk about our trauma and our experiences, but how are we going to ensure they're not going to continue? What is actually going to put into place? And so, yeah, having the power of the likes of the British Ecological Society supporting us to make those changes has, what I think really been quite impactful.
I completely agree with you, just in terms of having actually very tangible, simple actions that you can take rather than 20 different panels, 20 different talks, roundtables and discussions, which kind of, I think, can be a bit of a distraction sometimes from actually the very quick, simple solution that you need to put in place. But also what you said around, reducing the amount of required volunteer experience, the driving license, that's also a barrier from a wealth and class perspective as well. A lot of people are connected into placements, through family and, so I think, that applies to really broad underrepresented groups as well. But in terms of these organizations trying to become more accessible and inclusive, did the Read Network kind of come up with any other solutions that would support those organizations in kind of having a deeper understanding of, so once you've recruited someone, you don't want them to be a token, employee. How can you support them in, once they're kind of in the space, and make sure it's a safe space and it's done properly and with the right support?
I always think whenever, for any recruitment process, what you are looking for when you're hiring someone is enthusiasm and passion, particularly in the ecological sector, because it is hard work. It's not necessarily the best paid jobs, but it is very fulfilling work. And if you are passionate about the natural world and about wildlife and about conservation, obviously that's where you want to go to. So I think it already takes a special person to go into those lines of work as it is. One of the things that I think has been a really key part of changing those recruitment processes is giving the opportunity for an applicant to express that passion. So ask them to do a 5-minute presentation on a current ecological issue that they find most concerning. So you are opening it up for them to share their expertise, for them to go explore and actually find out what it is they're most passionate about. The benefit is also there for the employer, because that person might bring something to your attention that you weren't even aware of as being an issue. And that's the real value with having a more diverse workforce as well, especially within ecology. Having those different backgrounds, having those different perspectives is only going to enhance those individual organizations and the work that they're doing as well. Something else that I'm really passionate about, especially for people who are working, whether it be in ecology, but also generally for people visiting places that are like national parks, for example, is making them so they again are appealing to what is the reality of the UK demographic. Why are there not food vans that do samosas when we go to these national parks, when there are food vans that do fish and chips? Just having a bit of differentiation there would be really helpful. And I think for organizations to actually recognize where they have profited historically off of colonialism is another key area that needs to be addressed within these larger organizations. It's really important that they recognize, especially when you're looking at heritage sites or big country estates that are commonly visited now as a tourist attraction, but there is nothing to say actually historically how that has come to be, and actually the colonial influence that has allowed this to continue to exist in such a way. So I think organizations taking a look at that, and this is why, as part of the training and workshops we did within the British Ecological Society, was about identifying your areas of power and privilege, because everyone has power and privilege in some way or another. I mentioned at the beginning having countryside privilege, the fact that I grew up in rural areas and have a different understanding of what it is to live and exist in that type of area. But then I also am in a position of power and privilege by having a PhD. That's a very high level of education that, again, affords me different privileges in life than it might do for other people. So I think it's important for everyone to really actually look at their individual points of power and privilege, but also within the organization. as an adult, if you look around at your workplace and realize, this isn't the most diverse place, ask why. Why is that? Why do you not have any people from different ethnic groups on your team or within your organization? What were the barriers that they're potentially facing? Is it barriers at the recruitment process, or is it barriers earlier on down the line? Is it barriers when it actually comes to getting people onto undergraduate courses to study the things that are going to lead them into careers in ecology? Because there are barriers there as well.
Yep.
So it's really for organizations to understand what are those pain points and at what point are they actually creating this bottleneck.
Thank you so much. There's a lot of great advice for organizations out there. Yeah, I guess kind of skipping across into creating safe spaces in the outdoors in general and with nature connection, I think there's a huge part of kind of regulating your nervous system in nature that sometimes if you're not in a safe space, you don't get the full benefits of that, which is a shame. But I'm discovering some really amazing directories like All the Elements and Flock Together. Flock Together as a group, but they're all doing like amazing work in creating these safe, inclusive spaces to access nature for everyone. So you're not going to be looked at in a sus kind of way, or you're not the only person in the middle of a wood, and it's you're kind of in a safe kind of group and environment, and kind of feeling like not judged or assumed about, and you kind of can relax a little bit more. Maybe that's my impression of like what a safe space kind of feels like. But I know you're involved with Black Girls Hike, and so I just wondered if you could share a little bit more about that and what your experience of a safe space has kind of been, and the importance of a safe space, because sometimes it's not fully translated maybe, or might be difficult to translate to other groups. So just wondering what your experience has been, and if you could share a bit about that.
Yeah, so Black Girls Hike UK has been an incredible organisation to volunteer with and be a part of. And as I've mentioned, grew up in the countryside and big into being outside, love hiking. I do a lot of canoeing and kayaking, and I just always want to share these experiences with people as well. And especially growing up, having been the only person of colour often in a lot of these places, I want to change that. And so that's one of the reasons I started volunteering with them. Also with my experience of knowing some of the different rural areas that other people might not have visited before. And so with Black Girls Hike, it's especially empowering for women, and having that safe space where we can express ourselves, express the joy, express the frustration, and share in the beauty of the world together is a really empowering experience. I often lead walks that are in the Norfolk or Cambridgeshire area, because that's where I'm based. And I'll always start the walks from a bus stop or from a train station. So I know that it's always accessible to the vast majority of people, because it's also a nice opportunity for people to get on the train from London and go visit a different city for the day, go for a nice hike, and then go visit the city afterwards. One of the things that I have found, though, is even after just one walk, that engagement with nature has real long-lasting changes on people. I had a group of women who joined me for their first ever walk. They were a bit unsure, not really knowing what to expect, didn't fully want to commit to the hiking experience. So we're just wearing, standard sneakers. It wasn't a particularly challenging hike. It was more about just getting the experience of being in the countryside. And they had such a fantastic time that actually when they joined me on the next walk, they were telling me about all the new sustainability initiatives they were getting involved in, how the fact that they had banned single-use plastic in their home, how they were so much more engaged now with nature, with the environment, even just looking out the window, appreciating actually there is so much nature out there when you know what you're looking for. So whenever I lead these hikes, I always make sure that I have binoculars and a bird book with me, because I know for some people love birding, I love animals, so of course I'm going to be pointing out exciting birds. But I also make sure there are places that are really good for taking photos for Instagram, because I know the importance of social media. So I always plan my hikes where I'm like, okay, we're going to take a 5-minute break now, but it's also a really great place for you to take loads of photos. So that's another part of it. It's about getting people to see and engage with nature in different ways, whether it is through taking photos on your phone, whether it's through observing specific animals or identifying birds, or even just identifying some of the plants that are around us and understanding what the native species are. There are so many different ways ways for you to connect with nature, and nobody's ever really sure what that connection for them is going to be. So on those walks, I like to kind of provide a range of different ways that people can engage with it to see actually what really clicks for them. And sometimes it is simply just the walking and the fresh air. And this is one of the reasons why I truly believe that environmental justice is social justice, because being outside, being in the environment, having clean air and clean water should be basic human rights. It shouldn't be that based on where you live, if you're coming from a particularly urban area, that you should be not entitled to those things, when we know it has such a big impact on not just your mental health, but also your physical health as well. They did a study where they had patients in the hospital, and if a patient could see a tree out of their window, their recovery was quicker. And so it just goes to show actually how important that connection to nature is for our own well-being. And I think it's so unfair that not everybody is afforded that opportunity to have that connection with our natural world just based on where you were born and where you grow up.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm thinking of so many underrepresented groups and like working class communities who are in fight or flight survival mode and have never really had the opportunity to slow down enough to notice the nature around them. So a simple trip outside of London might then change the way that you come home and you kind of see London from a different perspective. I think even my time at London National Park City, my perspective of London has completely shifted, and now I like go and look for all the green spaces wherever I move and live. So yeah, I think it's just a flipping of perspective and a mindset, and it supports a lot of other issues. Yeah.
And I also think you don't know what you don't know. So you don't necessarily know about the incredible biodiversity that London has if nobody has shown it to you.
Right.
But as soon as someone has, you're looking for it everywhere, and then you realize it. And I really love that first, like almost like love at first sight, like experience that people get to have with our natural world.
Yeah, the little benefits you can get on a daily basis on your way to work, on your way home from work, like that kind of stuff, rather than the massive trips and the kind of, the idea that it needs to be that. I think that's been really, really nice. It's very often the case that the groups we're talking about are usually the most affected by environmental issues, and they're not necessarily involved in the shaping of the solutions and the decision making, as to how we kind of tackle these issues. I wondered if you've seen any good examples of co-design with communities or kind of collaboration in London or beyond that has kind of sparked something with you and you think that works quite well. Yeah.
It's often the way that people who are most affected by these issues are often the ones who are having to like pioneer different ways to address them. But that puts so much burden on the people who are most affected by it as well. So I think that there is a real balance between empowering people and not burning them out to solve problems that they didn't start. They're affected by these problems, but it's not their fault that these problems exist.
Absolutely.
So that's the importance of at least having that kind of that diverse workforce and that allyship and that collaborative effort. That being said, one of the things that was really great about lockdown was the reversal of something called helicopter science. So this is something that happens in Ecology, where a London or a UK, an English university or a UK British university will decide to do some research, say, in a remote corner of the planet, let's say somewhere in Africa, for example. And they will go over to that country, they will do their research, potentially on some of the resources, some of the ecology and biodiversity that exists within those areas, and then bring it all back to their UK universities and publish that research without giving very much to the local communities that probably have a better base of knowledge about the topics that are being researched, but that knowledge is really not being used to the best of the ability. Now, what happened during lockdown when the whole world had to stop traveling is research still went ahead, but what these universities would do instead is they would give the equipment and the skills to the local people in those local communities to conduct the research and send the data back for the analysis and for those publications. So helicopter science is basically when other, especially wealthy countries from the global north, are going into areas, particularly in the global south, and using their resources and their amazing natural environment to do that research. But then it is the global north that is benefiting off of that research and benefiting off of those resources, instead of actually the local people who live with it and could probably benefit the most. So this was something that was actually really, really good about lockdown, was the fact that people were forced to do that. I know that people are not doing it as much anymore. A lot of things have kind of gone back to what we were doing pre-lockdown, but it is something that I think was really encouraging and is being promoted more, giving people the skills in order to do the research instead of going over there and just doing it yourself. I had a really interesting friend who was from the Reed Network. His name was Lionel Yam, and he actually comes from Cameroon. He loves sharks, has always loved sharks, big fan of the sea, always loved it since childhood. And he told his teacher at high school, I want to be a marine biologist. And they laughed and said, that's a white person's job. And he was like, but it's this is my back garden, like this is what I grew up with,
right.
This is what I know it better than anybody else could. Why can't I study the sharks that are in my waters, kind of thing. And so that really helped him in terms of the activism he does, and now he's a very successful shark biologist in Cameroon, and people go over there to get his expertise of the local populations, which is really, really great to see. But it does really take those individual pioneers to say, well, no, I care about it, I'm passionate about it, why am I not the one who's doing the research?
Yeah, you have to like just break the system and just gotta do it for yourself and like change it. So that's amazing. Going back to, I guess, your talk that you did at the Glitch, and I know you were speaking about land justice and how historical legacy is kind of continued to shape who gets access and who owns land today. I guess for those who might be maybe unfamiliar with the framing, but what does land justice broadly mean to you, just to start with?
For me, it's largely about both access to land. So in the UK, 92% of land is actually privately owned. So only 8% of land in the UK is public community land. And it didn't always used to be that way. So it was between the 17th and 19th century, something called the Enclosures Act occurred. So the Enclosures Act effectively took land that was previously communal land. This was communally farmed, communally accessed. There was also lots of wildflower meadows, really important for biodiversity and the nature in this country. But between the 17th and 19th century, the Enclosure Act basically divvied up the land and privatized it. So land that previously had no ownership and was shared suddenly became private property of the wealthy minority. And this is something that massively impacted the working class people of the UK. Land that they were previously working on and using for free either had to be paid for or was completely inaccessible. And this drove a lot of people from rural areas into cities where amenities were still fairly accessible, but they didn't have that access to the beautiful nature around them and the amazing biodiversity. This was also echoed throughout colonialism, the idea of taking land that was shared and not owned and privatizing it and splitting it all up. So what occurred within the British colony was happening first in the UK to the working class people that were living and working upon that land.
Interesting.
Which I think is, a really interesting, parallel to be able to draw. And obviously what this did, it didn't just drive people off of the land and change the way that we access and use and can the way that we can access and use the land, but it also drove away a lot of the biodiversity, a lot of the insects. We've had this massive decline in wildflower meadows, and that's led to a huge decline in our invertebrate population, which in turn is also leading to a huge decline in our bird, vertebrate, mammal populations as well. So it's had this huge knock-on effect that has been going on since the 17th century, and we're still kind of dealing with today, the fact that so much land is still privatized. And the benefit of having that community land, it's not just the accessibility and that freedom, but it's also creating communities as well, allowing people to have that shared space in nature to grow their own food, I think is a really special thing that is starting to come back in the UK, I like to see. And I also know that you guys with the national parks is a big thing that you work on as well, particularly in London. But that used to be the norm. And so for me, land justice is really thinking about who can access land, who can walk on it. With the talk, I spoke a lot about walking as a form of activism. And that's really what I see Black Girls Hike as well, because so much activism focuses on the negativity. And that's an important part of it to help people understand actually like the big picture of a situation. But activism is also about joy. Seeing like that kind of enjoyment is a really powerful part of activism as well. And for me, that's what Black Girls Hike does. It provides activism in a really joyful way. Same as Muslim hikers as well. They're another fantastic group that is providing that joyful, amazing activism whilst also working as a kind of safe space. But activism like walking as a form of activism in the UK has been something that's been going on for so long. So back in the 1930s, there was something called the Kinder Mass Scout Trespass. So this was the highest peak in the Peak District, and it had been privatised for hunting, for grouse shooting, being privatised by the wealthy minority. People in the cities were asking, why do we have to live in these small, cramped places? Why can't we be out in the countryside? Why aren't we at least allowed to go and roam in our countryside, the land we've been moved off of? And this is the thing that really helped to... It was a big protest. There was over 400 working class people who went and just walked. That was it. That was all they did, was they just walked on land that should be accessible to everyone. And that's also led to what is the right to roam in the UK as from 2000. So the fact that we actually have this right to wander our own lands as we should do. But then I think that also needs to be expanded. So there's an issue with the fact that loitering is illegal. Someone is just existing in a place. You're allowed to do that in nature. Why can't you do that in other places? Why does there just have to be designated places where you can be a free person enjoying nature? It blows my mind completely.
Because it's free and you can't charge people to do it.
Exactly. So yeah, we've always kind of had this history in the UK with our land access. We've seen how that is echoed across the British colony. We've also seen how walking as a form of activism is a huge part of our culture as well, particularly as working class people. And so yeah, I think that's like a really key part of our history. Maybe not everyone can appreciate. But another part of walking as well is there is an opportunity to better engage and understand with the history of the UK. Again, thinking about our colonial history, how the British colony has helped to fund a lot of what are now country estates and natural areas that you can go and visit, but there's no recognition of that. And I'll often tell people Black history is everyone's history, especially in the UK. Black history is all of our history. And for me, this really particularly comes into focus when we think about the Newcastle Moors. So the Newcastle Moors are a very popular area to go and walk in Newcastle, and they're big flat moorlands, very beautiful, a very different scenery that you might not usually expect. What used to be there less than 100 years ago, so back in the 1930s, was a human zoo. And there is nothing to signify that that is what that land was used for. People just go and visit it as an opportunity to walk. So I think that we can be connecting so much more, not just with our land and with justice, but also with our history as well through these natural spaces.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think if large chunks of history are kind of missing also from our curriculum as well, it kind of feeds into, it makes false narratives easier to perpetuate if there's a large chunk of history that's kind of conveniently left out. I was going to talk about a little bit about coming from London. I think there are probably assumptions that I make about the countryside, and there's probably equal assumptions made about the city of London. I know there's lots of assumptions made about London here, you know, both out of London, here in the UK, and abroad as well. But as someone who has a good experience of both, what do you think kind of bridges us, and what stereotypes could we probably bust? Like, what's the connecting thing there?
One of the big ones that I always like, one of the myths I love to bust for people is about the Thames. Obviously, historically, the Thames was this really dirty, lifeless place. And that has not been the case for years. And people don't realize this. So a good few years ago, they did some surveying of basically, they take the water, they extract the DNA that they find in the water, and that tells us about the different animals that have actually visited the water and what is currently living there. And they found seahorses, otters, seals, so much biodiversity has returned to the Thames, and people still see it as this dirty, dead and lifeless river, and that is just not the case at all. And I think there are so many other areas in London where people might assume that there isn't nature there, or there isn't really interesting animals there, but there absolutely are. There are peregrine falcons that are nesting on top of buildings in London, and they are no less worthy of protection or of awe and amazement than the ones we find, say, in the Lake District, you know?
Absolutely.
Just because they're in the city doesn't mean that they're any less of that incredible animal. But if you don't know where to look and you're not aware of these things, like we said earlier, you don't know what you don't know. So that's one of the myths I love to bust when it comes to people talking about the nature in London. Is actually nature is incredible in London. There is so much biodiversity, not just in the Thames, but even going to parks, seeing all of the different birds. There is just so much more than what people realize. One of my favorite animals of London are actually the green parakeets, which I know is very controversial, but I really love them. And actually a couple of years ago, the RSPB did announce that they don't see them as an invasive species, they see them as a non-native species. And this is a really important distinction. An invasive species is specifically an animal that is not from here, that is causing a negative detriment to the ecosystem. If an animal is not causing a negative detriment, it's not outcompeting others for food and for space, then it's a non-native species. And we have so many of these in the UK because we had such this fall of biodiversity because of our loss of things like the wildflower meadows and the knock-on effect that had. What it did is it created all of these open and available ecological niches for other animals to come into. Some of my other favourite non-native species across the UK, could be shocking, some of them. Did you know that there is a population of redneck wallabies living in Kent in the wild? Yep.
I want to see one now.
So these are ones that have like escaped over the years, but because we have such
Where
a
did they escape from?
loads of different places. Lots of people have had pet wallabies over the years.
I'm in shock.
But because we have such a temperate environment, they've actually been able to breed and have their own little population that is thriving in Kent. There are also scorpions, yellow-tailed scorpions that live in the walls of certain manors in Dorset in the UK.
Wow.
And again, they like came over, someone is guessing, obviously came from overseas. They've found themselves a little niche. They've not spread around. They're not causing any issue to the other wildlife populations. They just exist here now. Obviously the green parakeets as well. And I just love seeing on a gloomy grey London day and just that flash of green growing across the sky. And I just think that's such like an iconic representation of London. Personally, I think the green parakeet is wonderful. And so, yeah, we have these really interesting non-native populations which have come to this country and filled these ecological niches because of the biodiversity that we originally destroyed over the past however many like decades and centuries. And I just think, again, thinking about the conservation of not just animals, but people and ecosystems and how it all falls together, seeing that same kind of pattern in the UK as well in terms of our human demographic. We created these niches within society that have been filled from people all over the world that has massively enriched our country, exactly the same as what we're seeing with all of these non-native species.
Yeah.
So that's one of the things I just find really fun. Oh, another really fun one that you'll often see, especially around Essex, if you visit any of those country homes, they often have these huge ponds, and more often than not, you'll find terrapins in those ponds, which again, non-native species that are just living there now as part of our ecosystems. And yeah, I love being able to see that.
I love that. Yeah, I think there's like a nice message in that, in the sense that nature does evolve and adapt and change, and nothing stays the same and nothing stays stagnant. And I think we had a ranger, Becky Lyon, who was doing a project around the word conservation and what that means, which is to kind of sometimes keep things stagnant, keep things as they are, which is kind of the opposite of what nature does. So like shifting our minds about how nature and us as a part of nature should kind of continue and evolve and change and be open to that. And I wanted to touch on, I guess there are some environmental narratives that are just quite disconnected from social justice for some reason. And I wonder why you think there's that separation, and maybe what it would look like to, center justice and climate work a little bit more intentionally.
Yeah, I think you said earlier on that the people who are most affected by environmental issues are also often the ones that are massively affected by social issues as well. If you think about issues within working class, or not having access to different areas, or people who are coming from socioeconomic or ethnically underrepresented groups, these are the ones that are suffering the most with the kind of environmental injustices as well as those social injustices as well. So that's why I'm always trying to link those things together specifically, especially knowing that being in the environment does have those physical and mental well-being for us. Like, it improves our mental health, improves our physical health as well. So everyone should be able to have access to that. But then I also think when it comes to things like when we think on a more of a global scale, the communities that are being most affected by the climate crisis are the indigenous communities who have been working tirelessly to conserve their areas and protect the way of that they are living. And again, thinking about the social issues they're facing, and the fact that their social issues they're facing are a direct effect of the climate issues as well. And I think it's just helping people to connect those two things together, and how actually by improving one, we are automatically going to make things better for the other as well. And it is about just reducing those barriers, improving accessibility as well. For me personally, because I am Palestinian, it's always been so clear to me. So my dad was born and raised in Palestine. He himself has a very close connection to working with animals. So he used to be a shepherd. He used to have his goats and his sheep. And so I've heard so many stories of his experience in the Palestine countryside and in rural Palestine, in the deserts, in the mountains, along the farmlands as well. So I've always grown up with a very different visual of what Palestine is, and having visited there as a young children as well, I think I have a very different interpretation of what it is. And for me, being so passionate about animals, I've always thought about Palestine, about the ecology, about the ecosystems, about the nature, and also how integral that is to the people. My family's heritage is Bedouin. So we are nomadic people that typically live with the land. And a big part of that culture as well is about not being tied to materialistic things. It is just the land that we are living with and the land that we're working on.
Right.
So I think for me, it's always been so culturally tied that, of course, environmental and social, it's all just combined into one, because we're all part of this singular ecosystem. And it's why one of the things that drives a lot of my research interest, even working with the chickens with my PhD and thinking of both the agricultural aspect, the animal welfare aspect, but then of course the reason why we have 4 chickens for every human on the planet, the reason that 75% of all land-bred animals are chickens, is because of food. And food security is not something that we have fixed globally. We haven't even fixed it in the UK. I think a stat came out last year saying like 1/3 of all Black children in the UK have suffered with food security, which is a horrendous stat. And of course, as an environmentalist, I know that globally we do need to reduce our meat consumption, but realistically that is not accessible for people who are maybe coming from lower socioeconomic areas. The important thing is for them to meet their nutritional requirements. Poultry, chicken particularly, very affordable, very sustainable source of animal protein, as well as being very healthy as well. So for me, what is important is if we want to deal with food security and agricultural sustainability and animal welfare, we need to ensure that those who are most vulnerable of food security have access to products that are of high welfare and highly sustainable and still affordable. And so bringing all of those things together, that human health aspect of it, thinking about the importance of food and food safety, then thinking about the animal welfare as well of the chicken itself, and then thinking of that sustainability impact, the fact that globally we need to be more responsible when it comes to our meat consumption, looking at all of those things together, that's called the One Health Initiative. So this was something from the World Health Organization from way back in the 2000s, but it's only really started to become more popular now. And for me, it's always motivated everything I do because I've always seen those things as part of a bigger thing. It's always been one to me. I've never seen human medicine completely different to veterinary medicine. They've always been interlinked, and same with like the environmental aspect of it as well. And I think part of it is to do with my neurodivergence. It's one of the like superpowers of dyslexia, is being able to see very big picture things and being able to identify those patterns. And so even when I worked for Cancer Research UK and for the Wellcome Trust, although I was working with humans, I ended up publishing on comparative oncology. So this is where we saw like cancer instances in humans that perfectly matched with what we're seeing with animals, whether it's a genetic level, responsiveness to treatment. So thinking about actually, if we collaborated together more, we would have shared benefits that would probably be more robust in terms of the science as well. So I'm always constantly finding those patterns and connections and thinking of how they link together. And it's exactly the same for conservation and for environmental activism and social activism as well. And I think having had the background of growing up so rurally, being the only person of colour in my school, in my area, at every single club I used to do, even throughout university, you know, having that resilience and that perspective combined with my passion for our natural world has really helped me to pull a lot of those things together. And I hope I can continue to do so, to kind of have that wider impact for people, for them to realise actually these things are all connected and we should all be working together. And I think that's why it's so important to have the likes of the National Park City and having all of the rangers, because that's exactly what they're helping to facilitate as well. Conservation isn't just about the nature and the animals, it is about humans as well, because we are part of that ecosystem.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think we've got about just over 100 rangers who are doing amazing work in London, and they're creating, you know, local community led nature connection projects or green projects. So these are like orchards, pocket parks, outdoor school shelters for schools. And there's a lot of really amazing ideas. There's a composting system happening on a housing estate. So yeah, I guess we're looking to embed ways of making these projects more accessible and inclusive to everyone. So this might be a really broad question to ask you, but if you had any ideas around that from any other projects that you've seen that have been truly community led and designed that have worked really well in terms of, you know, welcoming in everyone into a safe space, or kind of, you know, empowering people to make decisions that might not usually be able to make them.
I think already doing the things like the composting, having community gardens is a really lovely way, looking at the different fruit and vegetables that can be grown, that can be shared, the different meals that can be cooked with them as well, and kind of having that knowledge exchange is a really important part of it, so we can learn from each other, both culturally, but also some of these like agricultural or sustainability practices that we might not have been aware of. So obviously we met because of the Ecological Citizenship Network, and a big thing that they're about is citizen science. I personally prefer the term community science, which they are fully aware of. But it means more about being a citizen of the world, not that you have to be a British citizen in order to do the science.
I could totally get you.
Yeah, but I think language is important. So it's always important to kind of explain those terminologies.
Definitely.
But when we're talking about citizen science or community science, it's about kind of sourcing that research from people. So again, going back to my point of helicopter science, giving people the tools and the knowledge in order to conduct the research, to have that wider benefit. So some really great examples of community science that go on in the UK. You've got the Big Garden Birdwatch, which is run by the RSPB.
Yeah.
And it's literally just go into your garden in this one weekend, which everyone in the country is doing, and mark down any birds that you see. It is that simple. They give you everything that you need. There's also the Big Butterfly Watch, which is like another one that goes on as well. Again, just going out and marking butterflies. But there are so many of these different projects that are asking you to look for, say, fungi in like October, or looking for particular flowers or particular insects. The great thing about that is it actually gives people a purpose to go outside. You're purposely going to look for something, but you're also able to contribute to that bigger science and bigger research purposes. And a lot of people suffer with eco-anxiety. So the fact that it feels so out of our hands, like the climate crisis and so many of the environmental injustices that are occurring in the world, we can feel so powerless to them. And that does create a huge amount of anxiety, especially in the younger population. And one of the ways that we can actually help to tackle that anxiety and empower ourselves is by getting involved with organizations or doing things like community-led science, where we can feel like we are having an impact and we are contributing to making those changes that we want to see. So it's a way to like really give people the skills, but also empowering them to be the changes that they want to see.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's great. Cal, I read that you had the opportunity to do some placements with the Nuffield Farming Scholarship. So that was in, I think, in the Global South. What cities was that?
Yeah, so the Nuffield Farming Scholarship, it's a scholarship that goes on every year, and it's open to farmers from all over the world. So I was actually involved in a part of it as a scientific advisor. And for that part, everyone was actually brought to Norwich, which was really ideal for me because I didn't have to go anywhere. But what they did is they brought farmers, and all different types of farmers. Some were livestock farmers, there were alligator farmers.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a jackfruit farmer from all over the world, and all have different experiences as well. And that was a really great opportunity to understand some of the agricultural practices and innovations that are occurring that actually would be more sustainable if we used them in the UK. Having worked with poultry, one of the ones I was most fascinated by, and I think this is one of my personal missions in life, is to get something going about this. But in the majority of the world, especially across farming in Africa and Asia, they feed chickens with food waste. We have done this in the UK for hundreds of years. Chickens are omnivores. They eat absolutely everything. And we used to just feed them with the garden waste, the composting waste type of thing that we would have from our households. And that's what the chickens would eat. So we're not growing food in order to feed the animals. We're feeding wasted food to those animals. So sustainable, so makes so much sense. The reason we don't do that in the UK is because we had a policy change back in the 90s because of mad cow disease,
Right.
where you couldn't feed animals that were being used for meat production with other foods that were being used. So this was really important specifically for bovines, specifically for cows. But it's a policy that they put in place to apply to all livestock animals, even though scientifically it's not relevant to monogastric animals. So it's not relevant to chickens and to pigs. And this is why it's so important to have scientific backing for policy as well. So now what is happening globally is about a third of all crops that are being grown are being fed to animals, when we've already discussed the issue of food security. But what they're doing in majority of the countries throughout Africa and Asia, and they've actually started these initiatives now in one place in America and in one place in the Netherlands, where they're working with food recycling groups. So this is food being recycled, either wasted food from farmland, so wonky vegetables, for example, or stuff that's just simply not going to get farmed, as well as working with big food production companies with the kind of biscuit crumbs and bed crumbs, those kind of things. So much food in this country is completely wasted and thrown away from the farm, but also from people's households as well. So having initiatives where you can actually recycle that food into something that is edible for chickens or for pigs is such a circular and environmentally sustainable initiative that we used to do, but then we changed it. And actually the old way of doing things is sometimes the more sustainable way. And it was just really interesting because I had this interview that was a part of it. They were talking about what are some of the initiatives, particularly coming from the UK, that could be passed on to these farmers that are coming from the global south. And I was shocked. I was like, it's the other way around. They're teaching us so many things that are so simple and so sustainable and also of an economical benefit as well. And so it was just really interesting that they almost assumed that we would be the ones teaching them. And it was the complete other way around. They had so many initiatives that were just so smart that we should be taking on board, such as feeding the animals with recycled food to improve food security within their countries and also globally. Like, it's just such a no-brainer.
Absolutely. I also think with heat adaptation, there is so much that we can learn from cities, you know, across the global south in South Asia and Africa. And so, yeah, I think there's so much innovation, and we definitely need to be cost sharing and learning a lot more. Okay, this kind of leads me to my last question, which is also another random question that doesn't really link up, but what has inspired or kind of given you hope lately? And then also what you're currently working on. So have you got any exciting things coming up? You've just graduated from your PhD, which is huge. So yeah, what's going on for you next?
Plenty of exciting things always. I love doing multiple things at any one time. So at the moment I'm working as head of science and research for a biotech that looks at the dog microbiome. So where for my PhD I was looking at poultry feces and trying to find markers of health in their feces, I'm now applying all of that knowledge and research but to benefit dogs. So working with vets, working with researchers in order to be able to predict concerns that might be occurring with the dog, or just guide better nutrition and better healthcare toward dogs as well, just by looking at their microbiome and their metabolome, which has been revolutionary for human medicine. And again, me loving that kind of translational cross-section of human and animals and thinking about technologies that have revolutionized human medicine, being able to now apply that to animals, which I'm obviously very passionate about, is a huge professional satisfaction to me. So really enjoying that, as well as continuing with my work with the likes of Black Girls Hike UK. I also do some local volunteering in Norfolk along in my canoe, and I monitor populations of otters and water voles and eels to try and help understand the local biodiversity. So yeah, I'm often spotted canoeing with my dogs along the river. So those are just some of the things that I'm getting up to at the moment and different places where people might see me. But in terms of current inspiration that I have and things that are really helping to motivate me, I think a lot for me obviously falls to some of the work that is going on around Palestine, and for people to really start to show their understanding of that kind of environmental link as well. I absolutely adored what Greta Thunberg did. I think that such an iconic woman, absolutely incredible in terms of her activism. And she has just so clearly shown the importance of not just the environmental injustice, but how that is so closely linked to kind of like wider global social injustices as well. And the attention like she was able to draw to the aid blockage and the fact they've not been able to get any aid into Gaza for such a long time, I think was so important. And yeah, the work she's continuing to do, I just find really heartwarming, especially as a Palestinian. So yeah, always really grateful to see that, and for people to really start to pull those pieces together a little bit more, and to see that holistic picture of what is social and environmental justice tied into one.
Absolutely. Yeah, I love Greta. I mean, she was kind of cancelled from the climate space, I guess, about a year old. We didn't really, just kind of, you see the consequences of kind of taking part in something and what that does. So, but she's amazing. And yeah, no. And I wanted to say just a big, massive thank you for your time today. And there's been so much, so I don't know how we're going to edit this into a I've gone all over the place. But yeah, it was so nice to have you. And thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Yeah.
No, I'm really grateful to have had this opportunity and to come to have spoken to you and your audience. And yeah, it's been a broad conversation, but I think that is